Welcome back to Deprogram. This is the New Culture Forum show where we do our best to fight back against the forces of ideological conformity, particularly among the young. I'm Harrison Pitt, a contributing editor at the European Conservative magazine, and I'm delighted to be joined today, as ever, by Connor Tomlinson, the host of Tomlinson Talks at thelotuseaters.com, and our special guest this week, Patrick Christys, whom you all know, of course, as the much-loved GB News presenter. Welcome, Patrick.
Hello, how are you, Ben?
It's great to have you on the show.
Good, thanks for having me.
We thought we'd start with this. The media prides itself on being the fourth estate, holding power to account. And despite countless, frankly imported horror stories that they could be covering with immense zeal, holding the establishment to account, they constantly close ranks around the establishment when journalistic firefighters in the dissident space do shine a light on these stories. The obvious cases that come to mind are the recent Southport slaughter and the grooming gangs. How do you account for that peculiar lack of interest on the part of the media to do their job properly?
I think it's a few things. I think they're absolutely terrified of being called racist. They don't want to be seen as being Islamophobic. They also are at the mercy of commercial forces. And so if they have signed themselves up to something by Hope Not Hate or one of those groups, Stop Funding Hate, whatever they are, then they would worry about a loss of advertising, I think. I think there is also a sense that a lot of them, i.e. the presenters themselves, go to kind of the same dinner party circuits. And for them, they are terrified of saying anything that might be deemed to be a little bit controversial. So there's a few factors there. I also think as well that for a lot of them, they have dined out hugely on this notion of that multiculturalism is the best thing possible, that diversity is a great thing, and that, we need to see this influx of people in order to enrich ourselves. We've got horrible colonial wrongs that somehow must be righted. And so when they see these very obvious things like little girls being slaughtered, or actually little girls being raped on an industrial scale by predominantly Pakistani grooming gangs, rape gangs, I should say, they would rather turn a blind eye to that than be confronted by the effects of their own ideology. That I think there's more to it, but I think that's part of it.
And how do you think that, I've noticed lately that obviously when GB News began, you faced all sorts of uphill struggles. There was a commercial boycott attempt, a pretty collective boycott attempt. And I think most Labour Party spokesperson people wouldn't be seen dead on GB News, whereas now you've consolidated yourself a little bit into the broadcast ecology, much to the chagrin of people who talk about fragile broadcast ecology. Who said that again? It was Adam Bolton on BBC Newsnight, and I think they even wanted a whole segment on BBC News.
Which, by the way, sorry to interrupt you, which broke Ofcom rules. Ironically, so they didn't have any balance on that segment. But because the BBC is not really subject to Ofcom, they get to judge themselves. So the BBC referred itself to the BBC, and then the BBC said, "Oh, sorry about this. The BBC broke our editorial guidelines." But of course, it didn't matter because that particular episode of Newsnight would have been seen by however many people. It would have been seen. It's on a major platform, and it was the zeitgeist of the day at the time. I think it was all kicking off about GB News for one thing or another, and so they just put that out there, and then they decided to take the hit. They never contacted me personally. They never contacted, as far as I'm aware, I don't think they contacted any real GB News presenters directly. I could be wrong about that. They certainly didn't contact me. I would have happily gone on it.
Of course.
So they decided to just put a show out there that didn't have any balance whatsoever when they were accusing GB News of all sorts of stuff, including, ironically, not having enough balance. But of course, that doesn't matter because it's the BBC.
Exactly. So you've got both you've got both commercial obstacles and regulatory obstacles, of course. But I've noticed. Where streeting will now occasionally go on GB News. Yeah. It does seem to be a little bit more heterodox than it did at the beginning when people would sort of rebuff it. How do you think you've managed to fly free of the incentive structures that prevent people like places like the BBC and Sky News from covering these stories properly? Because you do still cover them pretty fearlessly, despite being more mainstream on one level.
Well, I know for a fact that members of staff of some very high-profile Labour cabinet ministers watch GB News. I know that their families watch GB News, and I know that now when they've won various seats, for example, Dover's being quite a good example. That Labour MP Mike Tapp there, he's very open about it. He comes on the channel, and but he's very open about. I don't know him personally, very open about the fact that his constituents watch GB News. So you have a choice: do you either shun it or say that GB News is some kind of horrific, racist, bias outlet? But then you are tarnishing all of your constituents with the same brush. The other aspect to it is, and it is a real pleasure to be able to say this now because it took a bit of work getting here, but our viewing figures now across the board are actually so good that it becomes undeniable. And so that's what we're hoping also then kind of feeds through to advertisers, etc., where they go, actually, well, hang on a minute. If you are averaging close to 100,000 viewers all like across the day,
Yes.
smashing Sky News, beating the BBC News channel, well, then at what point do the advertisers say that they are just going to come? There is quite an interesting thing, and I won't name the company, and I hope you don't mind, because I just think it would be unfair on the CEO of that company. But the CEO of the company is a massive GB News fan. It's a major company. It's on almost every corner of every street. And you can go in there and get your food. And he is a big fan of GB News. But they outsource their advertising policy to a group to one of a group of advertising agencies. I believe most of them are based in Manchester. And they have some kind of charter that they draw up. So it's not always the CEOs or the representatives of the individual companies themselves that would refuse to advertise on GB News. It's the advertising agencies that are hyper woke that decide, no, we're not doing that. And, now, though, that the viewing figures are thankfully very, very good, and thanks in no part to you guys coming on the channel, of course, but we're in a position now where hopefully we can break that, we can break whatever boycott there is, really.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised Mike Tapp of Dover and Deal, because I think he is representative of a trend of Labour MPs breaking rank from the radioactively unpopular positions of the front bench. Keir Starmer is still remaining unapologetic, as Chris Hope pressed him on at the press conference, for saying that the grooming gangs are a far-right bandwagon. This was a position that Stephen Edgington, again, broke for GB News, that was written into a report by Raiku, the head of Prevent, that said that grooming gangs are a far-right grievance narrative. The front bench have mishandled both that and Southport terribly. Mike Tapp of Dover and Deal, during Yvette Cooper's statement on last Monday, so this is a week ago as of recording, he said, this is clearly a terrorist attack. Axel Rudabkana has been charged as a terrorist, and therefore he is a terrorist. So why did the CPS and the Labour government themselves not push for him to be labelled as a terrorist? And then we see, after the, I think, shameful vote on the National Grooming Gangs inquiry, multiple Labour MPs, including Sarah Champion, despite rebuking Rupert Lowe for his language, dare he offend the Pakistani rapists, and the Rotherham and the Liverpool MPs coming out and saying, we need a national inquiry. And I think what GB News is doing, compared to the likes of Sky News, which you raised, which during the Southport trial, there is a clip of it circulating online, presenter Sarah Jane, when one of the guests blamed Prevent and the police for not catching Axel Rudabkana because he was made aware to them, signalled to cut the broadcast when she thought she wasn't on, and then decided also, and this is what I clipped, to interview the head of some Liverpool Islamic group who decided to say diversity is our strength on that day of all days. When those broadcast outlets are rapidly discrediting themselves, dwindling in viewership, GB News is gaining momentum, GB News is gaining more guests, and it's representing a larger constituents than ever, then it might be leveraging pressure on people in Parliament to talk about these issues in a way that just doesn't try to contain public outrage.
One of the big things about GB News has always been to try to have conversations on television that then we know are taking place in people's homes, around people's dinner tables, down the pub, just wherever you guys hang out, whatever. So we know those conversations are already taking place. But for decades, they've not been happening on television. And so what we wanted to do was to have those conversations on television, which gives people, I hope, the confidence to then go out and maybe express their views more freely, especially amongst a younger demographic. So what we are seeing now, which is something really remarkable, it's great, but we are seeing people aged from 16 to 21 really engaging with GB News now. Really engaging with it, really engaging with the topics. And that's a great thing. That's going to have a lot of influence there, because before that, the only narrative that they were really able to consume, pretty much, would be a hard left woke ideology that was pumped into them at every single stage of their personal development, right the way through from nursery, certainly at university, and then possibly in the workplace as well. And you had to be both brave and prepared to lose it all in order to have conversations, very normal ones, about, for example, Pakistani rape gangs. I mean, I would argue that the bigger problem there is the systematic abuse of tens of thousands of mostly vulnerable working class white girls. I would argue that's a bigger problem than whether or not you wanted to speak about that in your office canteen. But so that's what we're trying to do, is to make people feel more comfortable to have those conversations, make them feel more represented. And once they do, and once we normalise that, eventually, I think politicians will have to start talking about it themselves, because they are going to start, I think they already do, they're going to seem very out of touch very quickly. It's like you've seen it with Keir Starmer blaming the far right for a whole host of things. I think previously that might have had an absolutely massive impact. Now you get an eye roll. You go, oh, here he goes again. You know, we saw with the Burns night thing, whoever works as his officer as well decided to put a picture out of him with a drag queen to celebrate Burns night. Now, before, that might have been, oh, how wonderfully progressive this is. Now everyone saw it and gone, you are at minus 35 approval ratings in the polls, mate, and this is why. It's changing, it's shifting. I hope GB News have an impact in that.
It's particularly depressing, given what's going on in the United States at the moment, to reflect on all of these mass failures and of the British state. And I suppose one thing worth mentioning is that Trump does seem to be embarking on this program, this pretty unapologetic program of mass deportations. At the moment, he's throwing around American muscle. The recent example would be, I think Colombia was refusing to take back its own people who've made their way illegally into the United States, threatens to slap a 25% tariff on all Colombian goods, and instantly they cave. Like, Trump is throwing around muscle, he's throwing around American clout in the region, he's unapologetically defending what he sees, and I think he's right, as the interests of the American people. It's not just about America first, it's about putting Americans as people first. It's not purely an abstraction, whereas in Britain, this kind of gumption on the part of the British people themselves is completely lacking. Where do you think that, at every level of the British state, from Keir Starmer to pettifogging officials, where do you think their interests really lie? What do you think motivates them to be such a hopeless and craven elite as they clearly are?
I think they're so soft. They're so soft. They're gripped by fear of being called a hurty word by somebody or being ostracised, like I said, from that kind of loose dinner party circuit. But again, they're going to be found out very, very quickly. Why can't we threaten Pakistan with foreign aid sanctions or trade sanctions or visa sanctions if they refuse to take back the hordes of Pakistani rapists that we've got on the street here? I'm sure there's a catalogue of other countries as well. When you run your finger down that, GB News quite handily did a Premier League table of migrant crime, which I thought was quite good. We have got now some kind of deal with the Albanian government, so you know that is that. So
what would you do? We'll get our own drug trade back.
We'll get our own drug trade back. British drugs for British workers. But when it comes to some of the other ones that were on there, you know, you've got like I think I might say it. Morocco,
Eritrea.
Yeah. Why Vietnam? Why aren't we hammering them? Why aren't we saying, look, here's going to be a consequence if you don't take it back? You saw what happened with Colombia. I mean, Brazil, for example, as well, apparently last night said they were horrified that some of the illegal migrants from America came back in handcuffs on a plane. Oh, well, sorry, never mind. They're yours now. Just take them back. Why should we give a toss about what the Moroccan government thinks about taking back foreign criminals? Why? They're not our problem. They're your problem. Sort them out. In the case of Pakistan, I believe that there is the death penalty for child rape. So why would Pakistan have a moral problem with taking back convicted child rapists? And if they decide to execute them, then surely that can serve as a deterrent to their own citizens that are over there as well, the ones who have not left Pakistan. You know, why is this our problem? Why are we paying for it? So I would like to see us throw a lot more muscle around, but we're too scared. I also worry that because we've been led so poorly for a very long time now, and we've talked ourselves down on a variety of different issues, whether that was Brexit, whether that's our past or whatever, that we have now lost leverage on the international stage, that we have less muscle. We do have less muscle than America, because America's, you know, the beast. But I worry that they're so afraid. They've left ourselves so vulnerable now that they're so afraid. You look at Keir Starmer as well. I mean, he is a globalist, right? He is an international citizen of the world, in my view, before he's a citizen of Britain.
He's even said he prefers Davos to Westminster.
He has. So why would he want to risk upsetting international law? We can't break international law. Well, forgive me, but isn't Iraq subject to the United Nations international laws, and they've just lowered the age of consent to 9. So I don't think they seem to care too much about upsetting the apple cart there. Why can't we just say, we are going to hold your feet to the fire here, hold other countries ransom, use what clout we have, and get things done the way that we want them to do?
You say that you think the British states days, well, the officials and the elite that currently constitute the British state, their days are numbered. Why you? It sounds like there's a sort of glint of optimism there. What are the grounds for that?
A couple of things I mentioned earlier on, that I think something is happening with the younger generation. I think the generation that's coming up, kind of loosely speaking, after ours. I think we unfortunately were, and I think you both are a bit younger than me, aren't you? But it was bracket ourselves in a similar box. But I think we were probably the wokest generation.
I'm Gen Z.
Yeah. Right.
So we're Gen Z millennial.
Millennials are slightly more woke, the data suggests. But yes, I mean, comparable on some level.
Okay, fine. So there we go. But I think the ones coming up off the back of that there's something changing now. And I see that myself when I'm out and about in terms of the ages of people that are coming up to me, oh, can I get a picture? Or you're off TikTok. TikTok's having a huge, it's got its flaws, obviously, but it's having a huge impact in that regard. So the younger generation, but I also think that people fundamentally have now had enough, absolutely had enough. And people can see with their own eyes, physically, what's going on. So Altringham's a great example, and there's a place, what's it, Northants, I think it is, Northants has happened recently, where there's a relatively leafy area there that is pretty mild-mannered. Do you know what I mean? I grew up near Altrincham, so I know the area well. Not a lot of, I wouldn't say there's any hardline fascists really around the Altrincham area. But what's happened? They introduced 300 virile young Afghan chaps into a hotel there. And then we are seeing reports now that they've been hanging around primary schools, supposedly, depending on what you look at, maybe taking pictures of primary school girls. It appears that there's been some issues there with the police. Similar, I think, in Northants. So people can now open their eyes and see what's... You can't lie to them anymore.
No.
You can't lie to people.
Well, they did try. They did try and say that you could dismiss it as just a cultural issue. But I think just a particularity of all of the food groups that we've moved into the country.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah, no, and it's all worth it for the lovely Eritrean food. But this is a big problem now for the elites and for the government, which is people can see that we feel that we're worse off per capita financially. They know what's going on with their taxes. They know what's going on with their council tax. And by the way, there's a story today that a load of councils are potentially going to hike it by 25%. Are we getting? Where's that money going? We all know where that money's going, right? We can see that 55% of British households are taking more in benefits than they're paying into the state. We all know now that 1 in 12 people in London around here are an illegal migrant.
Well, at least.
Yeah, and the rest, exactly, yeah. But we all see it, and we all feel less safe. You know, things like whether it's muggings or whatever, or 1 rape an hour in London, but it's all just the general stuff about the terror, isn't it? I mean, the Southport thing's another example of it. And, you know, that idea now, that what is it now? Do we need security at a children's dance class everywhere in the country going forward? Well, maybe. And people don't you can't lie to people anymore and tell them everything's rosy in the garden and everything's going well with immigration and it's making us all richer, both morally, spiritually and financially, because it's not. And there's that disconnect. So what do you say? I think when I say I think their time's numbered, well, it has to be, doesn't it? Because everyone can see and feel that they're wrong.
Yeah, and it's very, very, the pattern you describe is particularly insidious, I think, because on the one hand, the British state, or again, the officials that currently constitute the British state, the kind of woke elite that we have today, well represented by people like Starmer, they are themselves responsible for turning Britain from a fairly settled culture with a homogeneous set of demographics, with a law-governed society, inherited in 1997 a pretty one of the most Rolls-Royce constitutions probably ever to have existed in human history, and they've made a complete pig's ear of it. And they've turned our society into a dysfunctional, low-trust society with precisely all of those things that you're naming. And yet their response to their own mess is to externalize the costs of all that onto us even more. So I thought I'd raise this now because it's relevant based on what you say. Like, in other words, do we need to have bodyguards outside a Taylor Swift dance class? Do we need to have armed men at Christmas markets? All of these, I mean, this is making our society into a much more surveyed and controlled one, which it didn't need to be when it was higher trust. So we always pay the cost. We pay an additional cost of authoritarianism off the back of the initial cost of living in a dysfunctional society itself. And so I suppose the thing to bring up here is that they're trying to deflect from this whole Southport thing to talk about two-step identification for knives online, trying to censor social media even more. That has been the emphasis of their response to this. They're completely trying to deflect, aren't they?
Yeah, and you look at what happened when David Amess was stabbed to death in his own office by a rabid Islamist, and I was amazed at how that conversation in the House of Commons then turned to one about online safety. Well, sorry, why? Why was that? It wasn't Twitter that stabbed It wasn't Twitter that stabbed David Amess to death. It wasn't Facebook. It was an Islamist.
Yes.
It's the ideology. So they seem to be going after the wrong thing there. And again, I think that's an easier target, isn't it? it's an easier target to go after what we're doing. And look, I mean, I personally would like to see it more difficult for children to buy knives online. I don't think anyone thinks it's a great idea when kids can buy knives online.
Well, why is no one asking the question, how did he get past the identity verification in the first place? Because Amazon has an identity verification process. They run it past the payment processor. You've got to show ID at the door. The Amazon delivery driver said that someone over the age of 21...
Ansel Ridhibana does not look over the age of 21, does he?
No. So what involvement did the parents have in this? Because they, according to the BBC, they knew that he was ordering packages to a neighbour's house and they were accepting them. They said, we'll accept them next time. Why didn't the parents stop him is the question. But again, deflection, because that asks some uncomfortable questions about the asylum system, about integration, about what gratitude they chose not to repay by raising their son as a killer. Instead, we just got to talk about online harms.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because I was obviously in the newsroom as the sentencing was coming out.
In the GB newsroom.
In GB newsroom, when the sentencing was coming out for Ansel Ridhibana, and we got that. It's a horrendous day. Obviously, you're listening to all this just disgusting stuff this guy's done, this monster's done. But the conversation very quickly does turn naturally to, well, what about the parents? And I am acutely aware that I think that most people watching at home, that's the conversation that they're having.
Yes.
I think around the dinner table, they might have kids themselves, they might have grandkids themselves. And I'm sure, hey, we've all made mistakes. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure kids are difficult to watch all the time and all of that stuff. But if you look at this and you think, well, hang on a minute, what about the parents? But there's a very difficult thing to go on national television and talk about because there are defamation laws. There is also the idea that I believe the parents now are in, not in hiding, but I think
Under police protection.
Under police protection somewhere, right? So you don't want to be seen to
be jeopardising their safety.
Yeah, well, you can't on national television. You can't go around doing that. And I would rather, if there is a case to answer, I would rather they face justice actually in a court of law and were prosecuted if there is a case to answer. Than vigilante justice. I don't want that. But you have to be able to ask those questions. And like you said, the BBC alert that the father apparently did not alert police to the fact that his son appears to have been wanting to go back to his school, possibly with a knife, a week before the attack. Okay. Now, look, there are serious questions about all of this, and I would like to see those answered. I hope that the police are looking at that because there has to be some parental responsibility. And we talk about this a lot. When I cover stories about the 14-year-old boy stabbed to death at 11:30 at night in Birmingham or London as part of some drug gang, well, did his parents not know where he was? So it's not the only, this is a big example of it, but there's something across the board here that I think as a society we need to be able to have more of a conversation about what are the parents doing and what do they know? Are they terrified of their kids? Is that what it is? Or are they just lazy? Are they incompetent? Are they bad parents? And if that leads to deaths or harms to people, then should we be going after the parents a bit more? I don't know.
Well, I think it is particularly salient in this case as well because, in my view, misguidedly, the British state gave asylum to these people on what I regard, I won't go into all the boring details as to why I think this, I think many of our viewers will agree, I regard as fairly spurious grounds. He achieved...
Well, it was 8 years after.
8 years after
genocide, when he was living in neighbouring Uganda.
And particularly if you bear in mind today, he was a member purportedly of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, which is basically a Tutsi ethnic political militia, which existed in the 1990s, and the Tutsis and the Rwandan Patriotic Front is now the governing party in Rwanda. Kigali is a Tutsi himself, and he is the president, a very scheming and cunning president who manages to get lots and lots of money out of the British state without anyone ever actually being resettled to Rwanda. You would have that's why I regard the grounds as spurious, and also there are other countries between Rwanda and Britain where he presumably could have gone. So I don't accept.
It's an interesting conversation because to take it to natural conclusion, I'm assuming that you guys might feel as though if the reason why they were granted asylum in the first place now no longer exists, then maybe we should have revoked that asylum and sent them back.
Totally, yes.
Okay, because the same thing could apply arguably with Syria.
Yes.
Couldn't it? It could apply with a whole host of different things. It could apply with a whole host of different countries. And why aren't we doing that? I find that a bit mental.
But the reason why the point about bad parenting is particularly relevant is because it begs the question: do you I think his name is Alfonso Rueda-Cabana, isn't it? Alfonso Rueda-Cabana, do you not feel like you had owed more of a debt to the British people than to effectively, as Colin puts it in his excellent piece on the matter, just kind of summarising everything, raising a killer effectively, whether through neglect or whether through encouragement, probably neglect on the balance of probabilities, you would imagine. Don't you think you owed us more of a debt than to let that happen? And given, despite countless red flags, never to step in. And if he had stepped in, he could have prevented the deaths of 3 girls and the maiming and traumatization of 8 others.
Well, one of the things that is interesting about this, though, is that whilst I think really you're right, and it's, again, I think this is a conversation. If people are watching this now and they start clutching their pearls and go, oh, it's such a controversial thing, just knock on the door. Yeah. Most households in Britain in the days after this sentencing, and they will be having this conversation.
Yes.
Okay. So there is that. The other thing I will say about it is I have got an unfortunate feeling that even if Axel Rueda-Cabana's father had dragged him to a police station himself, they still would have done nothing about it.
That's true.
And so it's twofold. The guy was referred to Prevent 3 times. He was found with a knife however many times. He called Childline, I think, and said he was going to kill someone, which is a pretty good indication. The police were round at his gaff. There's probably a whole host of other things as well that we yet to find out about numerous different times, the authorities. So, look, I'm basically with you guys when it comes to the questions from parents. But, I mean, look, we do have to be honest and say there is, based on what we know, a good chance his dad could have, handcuffed him himself and tossed him into a police station, and he might have been back out again in a couple of hours anyway.
Well, can I step in on the authorities there? Because this is what I want to parcel out, whether it's incompetence and cowardice and not wanting to be kicked out of dinner parties, or actual malice. Because there's been lots of reporting that I've done, that Charlie Peters has done, that Stephen Edgington has done for GB, one of the major positives in that column for your outlet, which shows that the Home Office have acted maliciously time and time again to ignore questions from civil servants themselves in seminars with Matthew Rycroft and my old friend Jess Phillips about migrant crime, that Ryku have time and time again gaslit the British public after one of their imported strengthened members of diversity takes the Quran a bit too seriously and detonates a bomb at an Ariana Grande concert, and so they tell the entire public, don't look back in anger and don't get upset about this. They always coordinate front pages. They did it in 2014. It looks like they did it in 2024, and they evaded my freedom of information request about it. So it seems that they're constantly trying to keep a lid on, in coordination with the media, the downsides of their immigration, multiculturalism, and immigration appeasement and Islamic appeasement policy. And I say that about Ryku specifically because after the Shawcross report that came out, which again only GB News wanted to televise, William Shawcross saying, you guys are over recording far-right terror, and you're counting that as reading Douglas Murray, under-reporting Islamic terror, and you've missed Abi Harbi Ali and possibly Axel Rueda-Cabana because he had ISIS materials. And then it turns out that when they went to a seminar about the Shawcross report, members of the Home Office Islamic network were saying that William Shawcross will call anyone woke, and also Prevent itself is inherently racist because it focuses on Muslims. And the same person that said that pointed to an ISIS training video and said, I know him, he went to my school. Like,
right.
If those people are in those positions, how much of it is incompetence? How much of it is malice?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it's fear as well. I mean, we had a little flavour of something at GB News the other week with the Muslim Council of Britain through the medium of the Centre for Media Monitoring, I think it was, which sounds really official, but is basically just the Muslim Council of Britain, who were throwing around about our Islamophobe. I mean, I was named more than any other presenter there, 17 times. Well done. I was named in there, which, one way of looking at it is that's a badge of honour. I suppose another way of looking at it is it was actually putting a target on my back, which I think was deliberate. So I chose to just not back down to that because I have firm beliefs that I'm not an Islamophobe, and I everything that I was raising was valid, and it included things like grooming gangs, and it included things like armed police at Christmas markets, and it included things like talking about the Batley Grammar School incident. Well, I'm sorry, but so I'm not going to shy away from doing that kind of stuff. But when a group like that does a similar report, say about the Shawcross report or say about Prevent or whatever, actually the natural response, and they've had success with this in the past, the Muslim Council of Britain, is for people to retreat and maybe even call them in for a meeting and go, how can we help you?
Yes.
How can we adjust to keep you happy? So you see that happening a lot. You're right about the coordinated front pages. I couldn't believe it. The time slot on my show, 9 to 11 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News, we get the front pages. So 10:30 I do them. And on that night of the far-right riots that never was.
August the 8th, yes.
All the front pages. And I was flicking through the Daily Mail especially, I was flicking through them, I was thinking, gosh, it's the same. A load of people looking a bit crusty in Walthamstow with a refugees welcome sign, fighting off the far right. And I thought, to me, that looks unbelievably coordinated. Because for me, the brave headline would have been, Did we just waste a load of police time and resources on a threat that didn't exist? Because as it turned out, it didn't, because the guy Nick Lowles from Hope Not Hate tweeted out that this Telegram list was a load of rubbish.
He said it was a hoax.
It was a hoax. He said it was a hoax. That's not us. He said it's a hoax. I think also just demonstrably, I mean, from all of our lives, I would challenge anybody who's been watching and listening to this now. Yeah, there was absolutely the case of during the disorder in the summer as a bloke with a swastika on his back marching around. It's a pretty good indication that he might be a Nazi. But generally speaking, in your day-to-day life, how many actual Nazis have you ever come across?
Particularly in Walthamstow.
Well, yeah. Where were they coming from that night? And yet the front page should have been, was it a waste of police time and money? Oh, and actually, really, for me, the brave was, this problem hasn't gone away. Public discontent hasn't gone away. Have we been gaslit into silence? That's what the front pages for me should have been. But you're right, they didn't do it.
It's also very interesting how whenever there's an incident or an attack or some kind of controversy that codes far right, and they actually have something, there might be something to it. And this is reflected in the Shawcross report. I mean, think of how kind of granular and specific the predictions about possible signs of far-right activity. I mean, it's not just reading Douglas Murray's A Strange Death of Europe, which again is a highly specific thing to be saying. If you're reading this book, Locke's Second Treatise of Government is in there, Beowulf is in there,
George Orwell's 1984.
1984 is in there, Tolkien. I mean, it's ultra-specific and almost paranoidly obsessive. And yet when an attack or an incident which codes minority occurs, it's just men in their bedrooms. It's a very generalized take on things. Yeah. And so the malice or incompetence, whatever it is, it's reflected in the immense selectivity about when they want to be ultra specific or paranoid obsessive, and when they want to be generalist.
When you say malice, right, what do you mean? Do you mean that there's the potential intentional
negligence?
Yes. To what end then? Well,
the Home Office Islamic networks say that they exist to hire Muslims and advance Muslim interests.
Yes.
And they are going to liaise with those exact kind of groups that Baroness Saida Vorsi once said, although not illegal, are illiberal, like Mend and Cage, who themselves are only ever one step removed from actual Islamist groups. I mean, for example, the Muslim Council of Britain in 2015 was found in a government report to have been set up by the Muslim Brotherhood. And the current people running in their election, one of them worked with the Get Out the Muslim Vote organization, which itself, I mean, we might say it's sectarian, but again, illiberal, not illegal. But they were only, again, one step removed from a chap who was working with now a proscribed group, Hizb ut-Tahrir, who Shawcross himself said in 2008 lobbied Prevent to soften it against Islam, and it seems to have succeeded. So it always seems that there's even if they themselves are not Islamists, they are more likely to give a sympathetic ear to concerns of people on the more radical fringes of Muslim activism.
Well, I think it's because for their mind, they might think, do we need the hassle? Now, I would argue, yes, we do need the hassle because we need to sort this out and get it out of society.
Sure.
But they look at what happens at Batley Grammar, they look at what happens, maybe even sometimes with the pro-Palestine protests that we've had in demonstrations. They'll turn up at your office, they'll turn up at your house if you... if you don't subscribe to their way of thinking, does people think is that worth the hassle? Similar aspect, different ends, less militant you could argue, but with the trans stuff, where people thought, well, do I want to say that I don't think that blokes should be women changing rooms, or am I going to get a mob of people with blue hair turning up outside? Now, I think the Islamists are much more threatening than the trans brigade.
In America, there've been a lot of trans mass shooters as well.
Well, actually, true. Yeah, no, right, fair enough. But it's this level of fear. But then they've won, haven't they? Then they've won.
Yes.
These people who are radical, who are militant, who do wish us harm, who do overtly support Hamas, who maybe practice taqiyya in certain things that they do, right? Then they've won if you decide to just cave in and not raise it out of fear. You should be able to say whatever you like about this stuff, and you should be able to put front foot forward and say, look, and have the backing, by the way, that tens of millions of people in Britain agree with you. The overwhelming majority of Brits agree that radical Islam is a bad thing. So it shouldn't be controversial to call that out, and you shouldn't take the knee to it, maybe.
Yeah, well, I think so you're right. It's not. So obviously there are very overt forms of militancy, very overt forms of subversion, and then there are cases, I suppose, as well on the other side of things where people are neglectful more as a result of fear than as a result of being motivated in a malign way. But somewhere in the middle, you've got this sort of, we don't want our dirty laundry aired in public thing.
Yeah.
And I do think this is an outgrowth of our experiment with diversity. I think that one of the things that's very unique about the West and the Western understanding of morality is that our morality is very individualistic. We think that the individual person is accountable for what they do. We don't view the individual as a cipher for their group. That's one thing, and that's not very rare in other parts of the world. And I think the second thing as well is that our morality is universalistic. We think of it as applying all times and all places, regardless of your position, regardless of your role. It's to that extent agent relative. Whereas I think from other parts of the world, and we've now imported many of these people here, they view morality, they view their duties as being basically just an outgrowth of whatever they think advances the interests of their little ethnic in-group or their little religious in-group. Particularly Muslims, they have a strong sense of both collective identity. They call themselves the Ummah, this idea that we're a global community of Muslims. And it's reflected in things like Shah saying, those girls should have just shut up for the sake of diversity. And I do think
she retweeted it. She didn't say it. Because she's litigious.
Okay, well, yes, she retweeted an Owen Jones parody account which had said it, and she retweeted it approvingly. So this is symptomatic of a kind of subversion, which isn't necessarily actively militant, but it is, I think, malign.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. My worry with the mass importation of people from the Muslim world that we've seen here in Britain and continue to see here in Britain is ultimately that if their absolute higher power and the ultimate law that they feel as though they have to adhere to because of their religion is the Quran and maybe even Sharia, then the law of our land will fundamentally mean little to nothing in some cases. So that would be my concern, because that's very difficult then to force integration or have integration or to have any kind of cohesion there whatsoever. So that's a concern I have. And I think we do see that. I mean, we were the Western capital of Sharia courts. We've got 85 Sharia courts in this country, again, at least. So that is a strong indication that there are vast swathes of the Muslim population in this country for whom ultimately Sharia law is the law. So there we go. And I think we should be doing more to stop that, really.
Yeah.
I think that's a big concern for me, which is are they do some of them ever really want to integrate, or do they want to take over? The other aspect, I forgot my train of thought there, but I've got it now. The other aspect to it was on things like election day, or during the campaign, when you had some of these independent candidates who were backed by the Muslim Vote.co.uk, that group who listed a list of 18 demands to Keir Starmer. Some of them are, the new Islamophobia definition, all of this. Now, I worry that if they go door to door and they're canvassing for votes and they're in a high proportion Muslim community and they maybe go to the same mosques or they maybe have the SIPs and whatever, that when you go door knocking, if you're canvassing for the Tories or for Labour or for the Green Party or for the Lib Dems, you're trying to sell your manifesto. I worry that maybe sometimes they might say, well, Allah won't be happy if you don't vote for me. And that's a very different thing.
High probability.
Right? So that's a very different thing. Now, all right, I don't want to falsely accuse anyone of doing anything here. I have a concern that maybe that will be taking place. I also have a concern about women's rights in those homes. So if you have a home with a man and his wife and however many children or whatever, does that woman in a staunchly Muslim household always have the freedom of her own vote? Maybe she does. Maybe she doesn't. And that's where I worry about that religious pressure.
I do agree with you. However, I must say that I don't think people should get married if they're not going to vote in the same way, or if they're not going to have the same values. And so I'm to that extent on board with the Ummah, but if in no other, but certainly not coercively. It goes without saying. I should say earlier, for any sort of moral philosophers who spat their coffee out when I said agent relative, I meant agent neutral. So you rewind the tape; it will make more sense. So I thought we'd ask you a little bit, Patrick, about your own background and how you were, for want of a better word, radicalized.
Well, it's interesting, really. So I was never very political, despite doing politics at university. My university career consisted mostly of me spending a lot of time in my bedroom, not really going to university. So that will shock very few people. But then I decided I really wanted to be a war correspondent, and I kind of proudly finished my degree and went home and said, I'm going to go and try and do journalism. I want to be a war correspondent. And my parents, it's the only time, bless them, that they've ever got involved in and told me not to do something career-wise. They just said, look, you're an only child. We love you. Please don't do that. Just go into, we'll back you in whatever it is you want to do. So I was like, fine, okay. So went and did a journalism course, again, pretty politically neutral. Got my first job, great paper, the Westmoreland Gazette, which was at the time based in Kendal in Cumbria. And Tim Farron was the local MP there. You had David Morris, who was the Tory MP. There had a couple of others knocking about. Roy Stewart was in Penrith. So like you've got that kind of, that cohort there. But Tim Farron was very hot on the local paper and all of this stuff. And it was all very Lib Demic. But I kind of started thinking like, actually, I'm not really sure I agree with it. But I got on with him very well. You know, I used to go for pints with him and stuff. And got with him I got on with him really well. But again, I was genuinely then just more interested in journalism. Like, what's the scoop I can get? What's going on the high street? Is there any planning corruption that I can expose? That stuff. And then I got a job at the Daily Express and the Daily Star overnight. I was working as their overnight editor for a while. And that was at the time of Brexit. And it was at the time of Trump's election, and it was at the time of Angela Merkel throwing the doors to Europe open to however many million Syrians and the rest. And then we started getting terror attacks. And then a switch went off for me where I was forced to confront more stuff, more news that really made me question what actually is how do I feel about this?
Yeah.
And I was sick and tired. The Nice terror attack was a great example where, I was in the newsroom when it started coming through, and we obviously were getting a load of stuff through that we just couldn't publish. God, it was one of the most horrific things. Honestly, this is happening, and this stuff keeps happening. We keep driving through Christmas markets, and it's the same kind of person with the same ideology, and we've let the ideology in. And then I really kind of crystallised it. I saw the way that Brexit was dealt with. I saw the way that Trump was dealt with, and that really changed my mind on certain things. I just thought that really kind of crystallised my view on it. I thought, no, I don't think that mass immigration is a great thing. I don't think that mass asylum is a great thing. And I really think that people who want to overturn the democratic will of the people or who ostracise people for supporting Trump or Brexit or whatever are actually not the kind of lovely people that they claim to be. And that really shifted it for me then.
I was going to ask, one last thing, actually, because I've seen a few people in rejoinder to you being very stalwart, especially in the last year or so. Saw a clip out of you from Talk Radio days.
Yeah.
I think it was 2018 when there was the whole UKIP leadership kerfuffle about the likes of Joe Batten and Tommy Robinson, like when you were saying that it wasn't a good look to have Robinson involved. I don't have anything particularly bad to say about Robinson. I don't know the guy. I wouldn't trust him to run a bath, let alone a government department. I don't think he wants to. There you go. But have your views softened on things like that? Are you less susceptible to...
I've got to worry. I've got to think about... I don't want to defame anyone here, right? But from memory, because this was a very long time ago, from memory, I'd attended like a kind of rally in Westminster that I believe was a UKIP rally. Gerard Batten was the leader. And Tommy Robinson came on stage. Now, what I will say is that I think that was a very different version of Tommy Robinson than the person that maybe he is today. I don't think he was necessarily all there at the time. I don't know how to phrase this correctly.
Well, he's been open about his drug habit before.
I don't know if it was necessarily, I don't know if it's necessarily that. For me, he didn't seem as though he was at his most coherent.
Okay.
So I don't know. And hey, I've been by the way, I'm not one to talk. I've been very open about my alcoholism, so I'm not judging anyone for that. But what I would say is I remember going to and I had a short hit on a show on Talk Radio at the time, and they wanted me to report on what I'd seen, and I said to them that, and they were like, "Oh, we can't say that because it will defame him if you say he's off his nut, right?" So I was like, "All right, okay, fine." So to be honest with you, it is quite as simple as I'd done a big thing about a load of other stuff, a load of other political commentary. I think someone asked me, and by the way, I think I know who the presenter is this, but I won't say it. But anyway, someone asked me a question about it, and I just put some words out. I wasn't really, and that was it. I mean, I wasn't really thinking. I wasn't really saying. It's annoying. What annoyed me when that clip resurfaced is that normally I like to say things with genuine conviction, and therefore I can back it. I can look myself in the mirror if it all goes tits up. With that, I looked at it. It reminded me of it, and I was like, I just basically churned out a bit of guff that I probably never thought would see the light of day. It was however many years ago. It was 7 or 8 years ago, I think, and we forgot about it. And then all of a sudden this clip emerges. I mean, I've been very clear since, which is that actually I think at the time I was much more susceptible to the rhetoric around Tommy Robinson and some of his views, which is to just dismiss everything that he says offhand by virtue of him previously being the leader of the EDL and whatever else. Whereas now I am much more of the view that say what you like about Tommy Robinson, he's got problematic past, and I don't claim to know the guy particularly well, but he was absolutely right about the great rape gangs.
Yes.
He's absolutely right about it. So that is where I'm at now. I think that's where a lot of people are now. But it is what it is. I think most people understand that people, over time, maybe think more about stuff. And I now wouldn't wander into a trap like that again, where you would just be flippant and toss a bit of word salad out there. Because let's be honest, that's what the left do, and we hate them for it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the redemption arc is strong in your case, Patrick. So, and it's just a wonderful indiscretion. But the reason I asked, I think it's interesting because it's one of the things that Peter Whittle, our director here, constantly talks about, and I think he's right to be concerned in this way. Is that obviously we have people waking up. We've talked about the Zoomers in particular waking up. You talked there about your story from I think Jaws with Tim Farron to talking about Pakistani rape gangs on GB News. It's good. But a lot of people in this country seem to have absolutely no idea in the least what is going on. And Peter has remarked on this before. He said he's often very bemused and baffled by he talks about one time when he was in England and there was a mass Palestinian demonstration going on.
Yeah.
And there were some British people nearby, and Peter went, that makes me sick, sort of thing. And they were like, what? Why? What's the problem? How do you think we can go about waking up more people in this country who seem to be sleepwalking?
Oh, gosh, it's such a good question. How do we go about doing it? I think things like this are very, very useful. Exactly what you guys are doing. Certainly with the reach that social media has now is massive. I hope that GB News is having a big role to play in this when it comes to actually normalising it. We spoke about earlier,
yes.
These conversations and getting that out there and maybe waking people up and getting them to think critically about certain things. I think we have to massively push back on any kind of perceived indoctrination in schools, because that is a problem. You could argue that university campuses have always been, lost a bit and everything, but we need to stop cancel culture. And people who are in positions of authority, whether it's at universities, etc., need to be hotter on that. You should not be ostracized from your university or hammered by lecturers or be able to be systematically bullied by your peers for having a view about maybe turning back the boat in the channel. If you're a 19-year-old at a university, you shouldn't do that. So that's going to have to be a big problem. But I mean, people also need to understand that when you see things like big Palestinian demonstrations on the streets of London, I turned up to a couple of those and I just said to my cameraman, keep that camera rolling. No matter what happens, keep it rolling. I was getting abused, I was getting shown, I was getting screamed at. People was one guy who was like came at me with a piece of wood, weird, and then and all of this, and I was like, so. But did you ever really see BBC News or Sky News or Channel 4 News getting in amongst it?
No.
And by the way, if you actually watch all these clips back, the questions I was asking was like, hello, why are you here? Hello, just tell me what's going on for you. I wasn't there going like, I wasn't saying anything about
I'll turn Palestine into a parking lot.
No, I wasn't at all. And so it was literally just so. But maybe if more people had seen that, they'd think, do I actually want to be on the side of these people? Another great example is what happened in Peckham. The Home Office scheduled a load of people for deportation for that migrant hotel, and like 20, unemployed Christys turned up. With their masks on, and they lobbed a bike under the bus, slashed the bus's tyres. And because our police and our Home Office were like, I don't know what to do about this, instead of just carting them off, then the crowd built a bit.
Yeah.
And then I went to that and I was just reporting on it. I was like, why do you want, do you not concerned about the numbers of people that we've got here? Do we know who any of these people are? I said, how are you going to feel if one of these people stays in the country and murders someone? And they won't engage with you because they just shout and scream at you. One bloke punched my cameraman in the back of the head. Like it was all. So my view is, if we keep showing people that actually, if you are, there's this lovely, fluffy person, you think you're doing the Lord's work, actually you're on the side of those people, then maybe you change your mind.
it's to your credit that you're doing that kind of work, Patrick. And it's been such a privilege having you here on Deprogram. And we do have some questions from members and from our audience as well. So,
All right.
Anyhow, thank you, Colin. Thank you as ever. You've been watching Deprogram. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment if you wish to do so, and we shall see you on the next one.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.